The distant peal of thunder startled Priscilla Forester as she huddled deeper into the hayloft, her breath catching in her throat with each creak of the barn's weathered boards. Exhausted from 3 days of running, her once fine dress was now tattered and mud-stained. Her delicate hands blistered from the rough journey that had brought her to this remote ranch outside Red Cloud, Nebraska, in the spring of 1875. As rain began pelting the roof, she pulled a horse blanket tighter around her shoulders, praying the storm would mask any sounds of her presence. Xavier Ryder had seen his share of strange occurrences in his 32 years on the frontier, but finding muddy footprints leading into his barn after returning from a cattle drive was something new altogether. With his Colt revolver drawn, he followed the trail, lantern held high, scanning the shadows for trouble. The spring storm was picking up outside, but that didn't explain why someone would break into his property. "I know you're in here," he called out, his voice echoing through the barn. "Show yourself now, and we might avoid any unpleasantness." Priscilla froze, heart hammering against her ribs. She'd chosen this isolated ranch precisely because it had appeared abandoned, with no signs of life when she'd slipped inside hours earlier. The deep baritone voice below confirmed her terrible mistake. "Last chance," the man called, and she heard the distinctive click of a revolver being cocked. "I'm counting to 3 and then I start shooting." "Please don't," Priscilla cried out, her voice breaking. I'm not armed." Silence hung between them for a moment before he spoke again. "Come down where I can see you, slowly." With trembling legs, Priscilla emerged from her hiding place, carefully descending the ladder. Her foot slipped on the last rung, and she tumbled backward with a frightened gasp. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Startled, she looked up into the face of a man with weather-beaten features, piercing blue eyes, and a day's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. Despite his rough appearance, he held her with surprising gentleness. "Thank you," she whispered, quickly pulling away and smoothing her ruined dress, painfully aware of how she must look. Xavier lowered his lantern, taking in the sight of the bedraggled woman before him. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with auburn hair escaping from what had once been an elegant updo. Despite her disheveled appearance, she carried herself with a dignity that suggested breeding and education. Most noticeably, though, were her eyes amber-colored and filled with unmistakable fear. "You're a long way from anywhere, miss," he said, holstering his weapon. "Mind telling me why you're hiding in my hayloft?" Priscilla swallowed hard. "I needed shelter from the storm. There's a town 8 miles east with a hotel, yet you chose my barn." Xavier crossed his arms. "Try again." Her eyes darted toward the barn door, calculating her chances of escape. Seeing this, Xavier shook his head. "I wouldn't recommend it. Storm's getting worse, and there's nothing but open country and rattlesnakes for miles." Lightning flashed, illuminating the interior of the barn, followed by a thunderous boom that made Priscilla jump. Rain was now hammering against the roof with increasing intensity. I'm being pursued," she finally admitted, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I thought this place was abandoned." Xavier studied her for a long moment. "Who's after you?" "Men who work for Theodore Blackwell," she said, unconsciously touching a bruise partially visible on her wrist beneath her torn sleeve. "He's a businessman from Omaha, powerful, connected." "And what's your connection to this Blackwell?" Priscilla hesitated, weighing how much to reveal to this stranger. "He was my fiancé," she finally said. "Until I discovered the true nature of his business dealings and his character. When I tried to break our engagement, he—" Her voice faltered. Xavier's expression hardened. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question, but Priscilla nodded anyway. "And he threatened worse if I didn't go through with the wedding, so I ran." The cowboy sighed deeply, running a hand through his dark hair. You picked a good spot, at least. No one will search for you on my land. Ryder Ranch isn't exactly on the social circuit. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by suspicion. Why would you help me? You don't know me. I know enough, Xavier replied, his tone matter of fact. I know what it looks like when someone's running scared, and I know what kind of man hurts a woman. He gestured toward the barn door. Come on, can't have you staying in the hayloft with the storm getting worse. Priscilla hesitated. Where? My house. It's not much, but it's dry and there's food. You look like you haven't eaten in days. As if on cue, her stomach growled loudly and a flush crept into her cheeks. I couldn't impose. Xavier's expression softened slightly. It's not an imposition if it's an invitation. Besides, he added, grabbing a rain slicker from a hook by the door, my mother would haunt me till my dying day if I left a lady to sleep in the barn. He held out the slicker, and after a moment's hesitation, Priscilla accepted it. Thank you, Mr. Ryder, Xavier Ryder. But most folks just call me X. Priscilla Forester, she replied, wrapping herself in the oversized garment. Most people call me Pris. Xavier nodded once, then opened the barn door. Ready to make a run for it, Miss Forester. Together, they dashed through the downpour toward the modest farmhouse some 50 yards away. By the time they reached the porch, they were both soaked despite the slicker. Xavier held the door for her, then followed her inside, immediately moving to stoke the dying embers in the fireplace. Priscilla stood dripping on the rough wooden floor, taking in her surroundings. The house was simple but well maintained. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a sturdy table, a few chairs, a worn sofa and bookshelves that surprisingly held quite a collection of volumes. 2 doors presumably led to bedrooms. You live here alone? She asked, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. Just me and the occasional ranch hand during busy seasons, Xavier replied, adding logs to the fire until it blazed satisfactorily. Sit by the fire. I'll get you something dry to wear and heat up some stew. While Xavier disappeared into one of the bedrooms, Priscilla moved closer to the warmth of the fireplace, grateful for its heat. When he returned with a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers, she looked at him questioningly. They're mine, so they'll be big, he explained, but they're clean and dry. You can change in there. He pointed to the bedroom he'd just exited. I'll have some food ready when you come out. Priscilla accepted the clothes with a murmured thank you and retreated to the bedroom. It was sparsely furnished with just a bed, a dresser, and a small table. The sight of the bed made her realize how exhausted she truly was, having not slept properly for days. Fighting the urge to simply collapse onto it, she quickly changed out of her wet, filthy dress. Xavier's clothes engulfed her small frame. She had to roll up the sleeves and pant legs several times, and used a piece of rope she found as a makeshift belt. Looking down at herself, a small, hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat. What would her society friends in Omaha think if they could see her now? When she emerged, Xavier was placing bowls of steaming stew on the table, along with chunks of bread. He glanced up, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes before he quickly looked away. It's nothing fancy, he said, pulling out a chair for her, but it's hot. Priscilla sat down, suddenly aware of how ravenous she was. It smells wonderful. They ate in silence for a few minutes, Priscilla trying not to gobble the food too quickly despite her hunger. The stew was simple but delicious tender beef, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth. How long have you been running? Xavier finally asked. Priscilla set down her spoon. 3 days. I slipped away during a dinner party at Blackwell's estate. One of the kitchen maids helped me. Her expression darkened. I pray she didn't suffer for it. And he sent men after you. Yes, I saw them in the last town I passed through. That's when I left the main road and headed cross-country." She gestured vaguely in the direction of the barn. "I saw your ranch from a distance and thought it might be abandoned. I just needed somewhere to rest and figure out my next move." Xavier considered this. Blackwell, the name's familiar. Railroad investments, Priscilla nodded. Among other things. Though I've learned his wealth comes primarily from less savory ventures, gambling houses, brothels, and worse. He's not a man who accepts being crossed. Yet you crossed him." "I had no choice," she replied, her voice hardening. "What I discovered. I couldn't marry such a man, no matter the consequences." Thunder rumbled outside and rain continued to pelt the windows. Xavier rose to pour them both cups of coffee. "You're welcome to stay here tonight," he said, returning to the table. "Tomorrow we can figure out where you can go that's safe." "I don't want to put you in danger," Priscilla protested. Xavier's mouth curved in a hint of a smile. "Miss Forester, I've faced down rustlers, renegades, and a particularly ornery bull named Lucifer. I think I can handle some city thugs." Something in his confident tone made Priscilla believe him. For the first time in days, she felt the iron bands of fear around her chest loosen slightly. "One night," she agreed, "and then I should move on." Xavier nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "You can take my bed, I'll sleep out here." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "You're exhausted, and that sofa is about as comfortable as a saddle after a 12-hour ride." Too tired to argue further, Priscilla simply nodded her thanks. After they finished their meal, Xavier showed her to the bedroom again, providing a clean towel and pointing out a wash basin. "If you need anything in the night, don't hesitate to ask," he said, pausing at the doorway. "Sleep well, Miss Forester." "Thank you, Mr. Ryder, for everything." After he closed the door, Priscilla washed as best she could with the cold water in the basin, the simple act of cleaning away days of dirt and fear, almost luxurious. When she finally lay down on the bed, the clean sheets smelling faintly of soap and fresh air, exhaustion overcame her immediately. Despite the continuing storm outside, she fell into the deepest sleep she'd had since fleeing Omaha. Xavier lay awake on the sofa, listening to the rain and contemplating the unexpected turn his day had taken. The woman sleeping in his bed was clearly running from something terrible, and every protective instinct he possessed urged him to help her. Yet he knew harboring her could bring trouble to his doorstep, trouble he'd worked hard to leave behind when he established this ranch 5 years ago. Still, when he'd seen the bruise on her wrist and the fear in her eyes, there had been no real choice to make. Some men deserved whatever came to them, and any man who would hurt a woman like Priscilla Forester was one such man. With that thought firmly in mind, Xavier finally drifted off to sleep, one hand resting on the revolver he'd placed on the floor beside the sofa, just in case. Morning arrived with the gentle persistence of sunlight filtering through the worn curtains of Xavier's bedroom. Priscilla woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up, pushing tangled hair from her face, and noticed that someone had left a basin of fresh water, a small piece of soap, and a hairbrush on the dresser. After making herself as presentable as possible in borrowed men's clothing, she emerged from the bedroom to find Xavier already up and cooking breakfast. The scent of coffee, bacon, and biscuits filled the small house. "Good morning," he greeted her, glancing up from the stove. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in days," Priscilla admitted, self-consciously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I can't thank you enough for your hospitality." Xavier nodded toward the table. "Sit. Food's almost ready." As they ate breakfast, Xavier studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said finally. "Blackwell doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily." Priscilla's shoulders sagged. "No, he's not. You mentioned heading west. Where exactly? California, perhaps, or Oregon?" She traced the rim of her cup with a finger. "Somewhere I can start fresh, where his influence doesn't reach." Xavier considered this. "That's a long, dangerous journey for a woman alone." "I don't have much choice. I can't go back to Omaha, and I have no family elsewhere." She looked up at him, determination hardening her delicate features. "I'll find a way. There's a stagecoach that passes through Red Cloud twice a week, heading west," Xavier said after a moment. "Next one's due tomorrow morning." Hope flickered in Priscilla's eyes. "Could you point me toward town?" "I should be able to find my way. I'll take you," Xavier interrupted. "But first, we need to address a few practical matters. Such as? Such as the fact that you're wearing clothes that would immediately identify you as someone in trouble. And I'm guessing you left Omaha without much in the way of funds." A blush crept up Priscilla's cheeks. "I have a little money, not much." Xavier rose from the table. "Let me show you something." He led her to the second bedroom, which Priscilla realized served partly as a storeroom. From a trunk in the corner, he pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "These were my sisters," he explained, handing the package to Priscilla. "She left them here the last time she visited with her husband. Said they were out of fashion and she couldn't be bothered to take them back to St. Louis." Priscilla carefully unwrapped the package to find several dresses, a pair of boots and undergarments. "Your sister wouldn't mind. Caroline has more clothes than sense," Xavier said with a fond smile. "She'd be pleased they're being put to good use." "I don't know what to say," Priscilla murmured, running her fingers over the fabric of a simple blue calico dress. "This is incredibly generous." "It's practical," Xavier countered. "You'll attract less attention in proper women's clothing. Meanwhile, I need to tend to the horses and check the fences after that storm. Will you be all right here for a few hours?" Priscilla nodded. "Of course, perhaps I could." She hesitated. "Prepare lunch while you're out. It's the least I can do." Something like surprise flickered across Xavier's face before he nodded. "That would be fine. Make yourself at home. No one comes out this way without business, so you should be safe enough. But just in case," he went to a drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a small revolver. "Do you know how to use one of these?" Priscilla hesitated, then took the gun with more confidence than Xavier expected. "My father taught me before he passed, though it's been some years." "Just point and pull if you have to," Xavier said. "I'll be back by midday." After he left, Priscilla set about exploring the house more thoroughly in daylight. It was modest but meticulously maintained, with small touches that spoke of care: handmade quilts, polished wood surfaces, and bookshelves lined with volumes ranging from practical farming guides to poetry and novels. She found herself running her fingers along the spines. Surprised by the eclectic collection, in the kitchen, she discovered a well-stocked pantry with preserves, flour, sugar, and other staples. By the time Xavier returned, she had changed into one of Caroline's dresses, a simple blue one that fit reasonably well after minor adjustments, and prepared a meal of ham, beans, and fresh bread she'd found dough rising for in a covered bowl. Xavier paused in the doorway, momentarily taken aback by the transformation. With her hair neatly arranged and wearing proper clothing, Priscilla looked every inch the refined lady she was raised to be. Something shifted in his chest at the sight of her moving around his kitchen as though she belonged there. "Something smells good," he said, removing his hat and hanging it by the door. Priscilla turned, a faint smile warming her features. "I hope you don't mind. I found the bread dough." "I usually bake every other day," Xavier explained, moving to wash his hands in the basin. Never expected to come home to find someone else had done it for me. It's nothing compared to what you've done for me, she replied, setting plates on the table. Though I must confess, I'm more accustomed to directing kitchen staff than doing the cooking myself. Xavier found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. And how did you find the experience? Surprisingly satisfying, she admitted, returning his smile with one of her own. There's something gratifying about creating something with your own hands. As they ate, Xavier found himself studying her more intently. In the light of day, with the immediate crisis past, he noticed details he'd missed the night before: the graceful way she held herself, the intelligent gleam in her amber eyes, the dusting of freckles across her nose that somehow made her even more appealing. "Tell me about your life before Blackwell," he said suddenly. Priscilla looked up, surprised by the request. "There isn't much to tell. My father was a judge in Omaha. My mother died when I was 16. Father raised me alone after that, encouraging my education perhaps more than was fashionable for a young lady." "And your father, you mentioned he passed." A shadow crossed her face. 2 years ago. Pneumonia. He left me financially comfortable but not wealthy." Theodore began calling shortly after the mourning period ended. He was charming, well-connected. I thought he genuinely cared for me. "When did you realize he didn't?" Priscilla set down her fork, her appetite suddenly diminished. "It was gradual. Small things at first: controlling behaviors disguised as concern, isolation from friends who weren't good enough, anger if I questioned his business practices. Then came the physical intimidation. The first time he grabbed me hard enough to leave bruises, I knew I had to get away." Xavier's jaw tightened. "And no one in Omaha would help you. Theodore owns half the businesses in town and has judges and politicians in his pocket. The few friends I tried to confide in either didn't believe me or were too afraid of him to help." Her voice grew quieter. "The kitchen maid who helped me escape, Martha, she'd seen what he was capable of. Her sister worked at one of his establishments and disappeared after refusing a client. No one would investigate." Anger flashed in Xavier's eyes. "Men like that deserve a bullet, not protection." "Is that your solution to all problems, Mr. Ryder?" Priscilla asked, not unkindly. "Only the ones wearing human skin who act like monsters." He met her gaze directly. "I've seen enough in my life to know there's evil in this world that doesn't deserve mercy." Something in his tone made Priscilla wonder what experiences had shaped this man. "And what brought you to Nebraska? You don't strike me as someone who was born and raised here." Xavier's expression closed slightly. "That's a story for another time. For now, we should focus on getting you safely to that stagecoach tomorrow." Sensing his reluctance, Priscilla didn't press further. "Of course. What's the plan?" "We'll ride into Red Cloud early. I know the station master, he's a good man, discreet. He can arrange your passage without asking too many questions." Xavier paused. "Do you have enough money for the ticket?" "I think so. I managed to take some savings before I fled." "Good. I have some put away if needed." He rose from the table. "If you're feeling up to it, we should check if your dress can be salvaged. You'll want to look like a proper lady traveling west, not someone fleeing trouble." They spent the afternoon with Priscilla washing and mending her original dress, which had suffered less damage than she initially feared. Xavier busied himself with ranch chores but remained close to the house. By evening, they had settled into a comfortable routine that felt strangely domestic, as though they'd known each other far longer than a single day. After dinner, as night fell and they sat by the fire, Priscilla finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Ryder? Truly?" Xavier stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "I had a sister." Caroline, the one whose clothes you're wearing, she's fine, living happily in St. Louis now. But there was another, Elizabeth, younger. Priscilla remained silent, sensing the weight of what was to come. She married young to a man who seemed respectable, charming even. I was away fighting in the war when it happened. His voice grew tighter. By the time I returned home, she was changed, withdrawn, afraid. When I finally got her to tell me what was happening, I confronted her husband. He denied everything, of course. Xavier's hands clenched into fists. 2 months later, she was gone. They said it was an accident that she fell down the stairs, but I knew. Everyone knew, and no one did a damned thing about it. "I'm so sorry," Priscilla whispered, unconsciously reaching across to place her hand on his arm. "So when I found you in my barn, running from a man like that." Xavier finally looked at her, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "I couldn't turn you away any more than I could stop breathing." They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. Eventually, Priscilla withdrew her hand, though the warmth of the connection lingered between them. "What happened after Elizabeth?" she asked softly. A muscle ticked in Xavier's jaw. "I paid her husband a visit. He left town shortly after and was never seen again." "Some questions are better left unasked, Miss Forester." The implication hung heavy in the air. Priscilla should have been frightened by the cold determination in his voice, but instead she felt an unexpected sense of safety. This man, who had known his own share of loss and injustice, had chosen to protect her without hesitation. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally, "and thank you for not turning me away." Xavier nodded once, then stood. "We should get some rest. Early start tomorrow." As Priscilla prepared for bed, her thoughts turned to the journey ahead. The stagecoach would be her first step toward a new life, one free from Blackwell's reach. Yet as she settled into Xavier's bed for the second night, she found herself strangely reluctant to leave the safety of this ranch and the enigmatic man who had offered her protection when no one else would. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with pursuing shadows and a pair of intense blue eyes that promised safety. The following morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm that had brought Priscilla to Xavier's door. They prepared for the journey to town largely in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about what the day would bring. Xavier had saddled 2 horses, his own stallion, Midnight, and a gentle mare named Daisy that he assured Priscilla would give her no trouble. She was grateful for Caroline's riding clothes, which made mounting the horse far easier than it would have been in a dress. "It's about an hour's ride to Red Cloud," Xavier explained as they set off. "We'll stick to the back trails, less chance of running into anyone." The Nebraska landscape spread out before them, rolling hills dotted with spring wildflowers and the occasional copse of trees. Despite the circumstances, Priscilla found herself appreciating the beauty around her, the vast openness so different from the confined streets of Omaha. "It's beautiful out here," she commented as they rode side by side. "Peaceful." Xavier glanced at her, a hint of surprise in his expression. "Most city folks find it too quiet, too empty." "I find it liberating," Priscilla replied, breathing deeply. "Like you can truly be yourself without judgment." "Is that what you want? To be yourself without judgment?" She considered the question seriously. "I think I want to discover who I am when I'm not being who others expect me to be." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "Nebraska's a good place for that. Land doesn't care who your family is or what society thinks you should be. It only cares about honest work and respect." They continued riding in companionable silence, with Xavier occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief stories about the area. Priscilla found herself hanging on his words, fascinated by this man who seemed so at home in this wild country. As they approached Red Cloud, Xavier led them on a circuitous route that avoided the main road into town. "The stage coach office is on the far side," he explained. "We'll approach from behind, less conspicuous that way." The town itself was modest but bustling, a collection of wooden buildings lining a main street, with smaller residences scattered around the periphery. A sign proudly proclaimed the population as 1,256, though Priscilla suspected that might be somewhat exaggerated. Xavier directed them to a small livery stable behind the stage coach office, where an older man with a weathered face greeted them with familiarity. "X. Wasn't expecting to see you in town this week," the man called, approaching to help them dismount. "Change of plans, Joe. This is my cousin, Miss Priscilla. She's catching the westbound stage this morning." Joe tipped his hat to Priscilla. "Madam, stage is due in about an hour, running on time for once." Priscilla returned the greeting, silently grateful for Xavier's quick explanation of her presence. As Joe took the horses, Xavier guided her toward the stage coach office with a gentle hand at her elbow. "Cousin," she whispered. "Simpler than explaining the truth," he replied quietly, "and less likely to raise questions." The station master, a portly man named Mr. Peterson, was equally accommodating, especially when Xavier quietly mentioned that his cousin was traveling to escape an unfortunate domestic situation. A ticket was procured with minimal paperwork, and Priscilla was assured there would be room on the westbound coach to Grand Island, where she could connect with the main line heading to Wyoming Territory and beyond. With the arrangements made, Xavier suggested they wait at the small cafe across the street. "Safer than sitting in the open at the station," he explained, "and their coffee's decent." The cafe was quiet at mid-morning, with only a few patrons scattered at tables. They found a spot near the window where Xavier could keep an eye on both the street and the stage coach office. As they sipped their coffee, Priscilla found herself searching for words to express her gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you properly for everything you've done," she finally said. "You've risked so much for a complete stranger." Xavier's expression softened slightly. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Miss Forester. Priscilla," she corrected gently. "After all this, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." "Priscilla," he repeated, and something in the way he said it made her heart flutter unexpectedly. The moment was interrupted by the cafe door opening, bringing in three men whose appearance immediately put Xavier on alert. They were city men, dressed in suits that had seen better days, with the hard eyes of those accustomed to violence. One wore a distinctive scar across his cheek. Xavier shifted subtly, positioning himself to block their view of Priscilla, who had gone pale with recognition. "Blackwell's men," she whispered, her hand trembling against her coffee cup. "The one with the scar, that's Jacob Mercer, his chief enforcer." "Don't look at them," Xavier instructed quietly. "Keep your head down and your face turned away." The men took a table near the door, ordering coffee in loud voices. They showed a photograph to the waitress, who shook her head and moved away uncomfortably. "They're asking about me," Priscilla whispered, panic edging into her voice. Xavier reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture appearing romantic to anyone watching but intended to steady her. "Look at me, not them," he said, his voice low and calm. "We're just a couple having coffee before the stage arrives. Nothing suspicious." Priscilla forced herself to meet his gaze, drawing strength from the steady confidence she found there. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, a soothing rhythm that helped calm her racing heart. "The stage will be here soon," he continued conversationally, though his eyes conveyed the seriousness of their situation. "When it arrives, we'll walk out normally. If they follow, I'll handle it." "There are 3 of them," Priscilla protested quietly. The corner of Xavier's mouth lifted in a hint of a smile. "I've faced worse odds." The minutes stretched painfully as they maintained their casual conversation, all while acutely aware of the men at the other table. When the stagecoach was finally heard rumbling into town, Xavier paid for their coffee and offered Priscilla his arm. "Shall we, cousin? Wouldn't want to miss your departure." They walked out of the cafe with deliberate normalcy, but Priscilla could feel Mercer's eyes following them. As they crossed the street toward the stagecoach office, heavy footsteps sounded behind them. "Excuse me, miss," called Mercer's gravelly voice. "Might I have a word?" Xavier turned first, positioning himself slightly in front of Priscilla. "Can I help you, gentlemen? My cousin and I are in something of a hurry." Mercer's eyes narrowed as he studied Priscilla's partially obscured face. "Your cousin, is it? Funny, she looks remarkably like someone we're looking for. A runaway fiancé from Omaha." "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Xavier replied coolly. "This is my cousin Priscilla, visiting from St. Louis. Now, if you'll excuse us, her stage is about to depart." Mercer stepped closer, his two companions flanking him. "I don't think so. Why don't you step aside, Cowboy, and let the lady speak for herself?" Xavier's posture changed subtly, and Priscilla could sense the coiled tension in him. "The lady has nothing to say to you. I suggest you move along before this becomes unpleasant." The scar on Mercer's face twisted as he sneered. 3 against 1, friend. Those odds don't favor you." "That depends on the one," Xavier replied, his voice dangerously soft. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of Red Cloud's sheriff, a tall man with graying temples who approached with purposeful strides. "Problem here, X," he called. Mercer's eyes flicked to the lawman, calculation evident in his expression. "No problem, Sheriff Daniels," Xavier answered, never taking his eyes off Mercer. "These gentlemen were just leaving." The sheriff looked between the groups, his experienced gaze taking in the situation. "You fellows passing through town?" "Just looking for someone," Mercer replied, his tone less aggressive but no less menacing. "A woman who ran out on her obligations in Omaha." "Well, this here is Ryder's cousin from back east," Sheriff Daniels said, moving to stand beside Xavier. "Known X and his family for years. So unless you've got some official papers, I suggest you continue your search elsewhere." Mercer hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he stepped back. "Our mistake. Sorry to trouble you, miss." His eyes locked with Priscilla's for a moment, and his next words contained a clear threat. "Mr. Blackwell will be disappointed. He's most eager to be reunited with his beloved." With that, he and his companions retreated across the street, though they made no move to leave town. "Thanks, Sheriff," Xavier said quietly. Sheriff Daniels nodded. "Noticed them asking questions around town this morning. Didn't like the look of them." He glanced at Priscilla. "Stage is loading up now if you're heading out." "Yes, thank you," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll walk you over," Xavier said, offering his arm again. As they approached the stagecoach, Priscilla felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. Mercer and his men were watching from across the street, and she had no doubt they would follow the stage as soon as it departed. The stagecoach driver was loading luggage while passengers began to board. Xavier collected Priscilla's small bag from where he'd stowed it at the station and handed it to the driver, who secured it with the other luggage. "This is it," Xavier said, turning to face her. Something in his expression had changed, a tension that hadn't been there before. "They'll follow the stage," Priscilla said quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing since their encounter. "They know I'm on it now." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Yes. What do I do?" He hesitated, then made a decision. "Don't get on." Priscilla blinked in surprise. "What?" They're watching the stage. They expect you to board." His voice dropped even lower. "When I move to embrace you goodbye, I want you to slip around to the other side of the coach. Joe's waiting in the alley with the horses. Get to Daisy and ride hard back to the ranch. I'll meet you there." "But what about you?" "I'm going to create a distraction," Xavier said, his eyes flickering briefly to Mercer and his men. "One that should give you time to get clear of town." Priscilla shook her head. "I can't let you put yourself at risk like this, not after everything you've already done." "Trust me," Xavier said, and there was something in his voice, in his eyes, that made it impossible for Priscilla to refuse. "Please." After a moment she nodded. "Be careful." "Always am." He stepped forward as if to embrace her goodbye, using his body to shield her from view as she slipped around the side of the coach. "Go," he whispered. Heart pounding, Priscilla ducked into the alley where Joe was indeed waiting with both horses. He helped her mount quickly, saying nothing but giving her an encouraging nod. Without looking back, she urged Daisy forward, taking the back route out of town that Xavier had shown her on their arrival. Behind her, she heard raised voices and then a gunshot, followed by shouts of alarm. It took every ounce of willpower not to turn back, but she remembered Xavier's instructions and kept riding, pushing Daisy to a gallop once they cleared the town limits. The ride back to the ranch seemed endless, every shadow and sound making her heart jump with fear that Mercer and his men were in pursuit. When the familiar outline of Xavier's house finally appeared on the horizon, Priscilla nearly wept with relief. She dismounted quickly and led Daisy to the barn, unsaddling her as Xavier had shown her and making sure the horse had water. Then she hurried to the house, where she paced anxiously, watching the road for any sign of Xavier's return or pursuit. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Priscilla tried to distract herself by preparing food, cleaning, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from conjuring worst-case scenarios. When the sun began to set with still no sign of Xavier, true fear set in. Had he been arrested, hurt, killed? The thought that he might have sacrificed himself to ensure her escape was unbearable. As darkness fell, Priscilla found herself standing on the porch, straining to hear any approach over the evening sounds of the prairie. Finally, just as full night descended, she heard the distant rhythm of hoofbeats. Grabbing the small revolver Xavier had given her, she positioned herself in the doorway, ready to defend the house if necessary. The rider emerged from the darkness, and even in the dim moonlight, Priscilla recognized Xavier's broad-shouldered silhouette. She rushed down the porch steps, relief flooding through her. Xavier dismounted slowly, and as he stepped into the light spilling from the house, Priscilla gasped. His face was bruised, a cut above his eyebrow crusted with dried blood, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone nursing injured ribs. "You're hurt," she said, hurrying to his side. "I've had worse," he replied, though he didn't refuse her supporting arm as they walked to the house. Mercer and his boys decided to take exception to my interference. "What happened after I left?" Xavier allowed her to guide him to a chair, wincing slightly as he sat. "I made sure they saw me putting a woman on the stage. The sheriff's niece was happy to play along, wearing your cloak. She's traveling to Grand Island anyway. They believed it was me." "They did until the stage was well out of town," Xavier confirmed. "By then, you were long gone. When they realized they'd been tricked, they weren't pleased." Priscilla hurried to get water and clean cloths. "They did this to you," started to. Sheriff Daniels intervened before they could do too much damage. A grim satisfaction crept into his voice. "Not before I put Mercer on the ground, though. Man doesn't fight nearly as well as he threatens." As Priscilla gently cleaned the cut on his forehead, Xavier continued. "Sheriff locked them up for assault, but they'll be out by morning. Blackwell has too much influence for them to be held long, even this far from Omaha. Then they'll come looking for me again, Priscilla said, her hands trembling slightly. Xavier caught her wrist gently. Not immediately. I made sure they believe you're on that westbound stage. They'll follow it, at least for a while. But eventually they'll realize I'm not on it. Yes, Xavier agreed. Which means we need to figure out our next move. Priscilla set aside the bloodied cloth. Our next move? Did you think I was going to abandon you now? Xavier asked, a hint of incredulity in his voice. After all this. I've already brought you nothing but trouble, Priscilla protested. Look at you. You're injured because of me. I'm injured because men like Mercer think they can take what they want without consequence, Xavier corrected. That's not on you. Priscilla sank into the chair opposite him. What do we do now? I can't stay here indefinitely. They'll eventually work out that I never got on that stage. Xavier leaned back, wincing slightly at the movement. I have a friend in Wyoming Territory, Jackson McCall, owns a ranch near Laramie. He owes me a favor, and it's far enough away that Blackwell's influence shouldn't reach. You'd send me there. I'd take you there, Xavier clarified. We can leave tomorrow, travel cross-country. It'll be slower than the stage, but safer. Priscilla stared at him. You'd leave your ranch. Your home. I have a foreman who can manage things for a few weeks. Xavier's eyes met hers steadily. Unless you'd prefer to go alone. No, Priscilla replied, surprising herself with how quickly the answer came. No, I wouldn't. Something passed between them then, an understanding that transcended the brief time they'd known each other. In the space of 2 days, Xavier Ryder had become more than a rescuer. He'd become someone she trusted implicitly, someone whose presence made her feel secure in a way she hadn't since before her father's death. Then it's settled, Xavier said. We leave at first light. As Priscilla helped him to bed, insisting he take it while she used the second bedroom, she found herself wondering at the strange turn her life had taken. She had fled Omaha in terror, certain she would never find safety again. Instead, she had found this man complicated, honorable, and now injured because he had chosen to protect her. Whatever came next, she knew with absolute certainty that she was no longer alone in her flight from Theodore Blackwell. The journey to Wyoming Territory began before dawn the next morning. Xavier, despite his injuries, was efficient in their preparations, packing provisions, saddling the horses, and mapping their route away from main trails where Blackwell's men might look for them once they realized they'd been deceived. We'll head northwest, he explained as they rode out. Cut across country toward the North Platte River, then follow it west. It's longer but less traveled. Priscilla nodded, adjusting the wide-brimmed hat he'd given her to shield her face. She wore riding clothes, again practical for the journey, though she had packed one of Caroline's dresses in her saddlebag for when they reached civilization. The first day's travel was arduous but uneventful. Xavier set a steady pace, mindful of the horses' endurance for a long journey. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 30 miles, making camp in a sheltered hollow near a small stream. As Xavier built a fire, Priscilla marveled at how quickly she was adapting to this nomadic existence, so different from the structured, comfortable life she had known in Omaha. You're handling this well, Xavier commented as they ate a simple supper of jerky, hardtack, and coffee. Most city women would be complaining by now. Priscilla smiled faintly. I think I left complaints behind in Omaha, along with afternoon teas and gossip circles. She looked up at the vast canopy of stars overhead. Besides, there's a certain freedom in this, isn't there? Just the horizon ahead and your own choices to make. Xavier studied her across the fire, his expression thoughtful. That's it exactly. It's why I came west after the war. Couldn't stomach going back to Virginia to all those expectations and judgments. Is that where you're from originally? Virginia, he nodded. Old family, old money, or at least it was before the war changed everything. A shadow crossed his face. My father couldn't accept that the world had changed, drank himself to death rather than adapt. I'm sorry, Priscilla said softly. Xavier shrugged, though the casual gesture didn't match the pain in his eyes. It was a long time ago. After Elizabeth died, there was nothing keeping me there. I headed west, worked cattle drives, tried my hand at mining, eventually saved enough to buy my place in Nebraska. And you've been there ever since, 5 years now. He poked at the fire with a stick. Built something I could be proud of. Something that was mine, not handed down or dictated by others. Priscilla thought about the neat ranch house, the well-maintained barn, the careful organization of everything on his property. It was indeed something to be proud of, a life carved from wilderness by his own hands. And now you've left it behind because of me. Guilt colored her words. Xavier looked up sharply. I chose to help you, Priscilla. Don't take that choice away from me by feeling guilty about it. His directness startled her into silence for a moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry either, he added, his tone gentler. Just accept that sometimes people do things because it's the right thing to do, not because they're obligated. That night, as they settled to sleep on opposite sides of the fire, Priscilla found herself watching Xavier's profile in the dying firelight. He was unlike any man she had ever known, straightforward, uncompromising in his principles, yet capable of unexpected gentleness. The realization that she was coming to care for him more deeply than she should frightened her almost as much as Blackwell's pursuit. The following days fell into a rhythm of travel by day and camping by night. They skirted small settlements when possible, stopping only when necessary to replenish supplies. Xavier's injuries gradually healed, though Priscilla noticed he still favored his left side when mounting his horse. On the fourth night, as they made camp beside the North Platte River, a spring storm rolled in unexpectedly. They barely had time to secure the horses and take shelter beneath an overhanging rock ledge before rain began pelting down in sheets. Reminds me of the night we met, Priscilla said, huddled beneath a blanket as thunder rumbled overhead. Xavier, working to maintain their small fire in the sheltered space, glanced up with a half-smile. Except this time you're not hiding in my hayloft. No, she agreed, returning his smile. This time I'm running away with you. Quite the scandal by Omaha standards. Somehow I don't think you're too concerned about Omaha standards anymore, Xavier observed. Priscilla laughed softly. No, I suppose I'm not. She pulled the blanket tighter as a gust of wind drove rain almost horizontally. Is it much farther to your friend's ranch? Another week, give or take, depending on weather and terrain. Xavier moved to sit beside her, adding his blanket to hers for additional warmth. Cold. She nodded, grateful when he hesitantly put an arm around her shoulders. The simple contact sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the blanket or the fire. Tell me about your friend, she said, trying to distract herself from her awareness of his proximity. The one in Wyoming. Jackson, he's a good man. Fought in the war on the Union side. We met after, during a cattle drive when both of us were trying to forget things we'd seen. Xavier's voice took on a reminiscent quality. He saved my life when a river crossing went bad. Nearly drowned trying to pull me out from under a panicked steer. He sounds brave. Brave, stubborn, and the most honest man I know, Xavier agreed. His wife Sarah is cut from the same cloth, came west as a schoolteacher, ended up falling for the most unlikely rancher in the territory. Priscilla leaned slightly into his warmth. And you think they'll help me? without question. His arm tightened fractionally around her. Jackson's father was like Blackwell, wealthy, influential, and cruel. He understands what it means to need escape. They fell silent, listening to the storm rage around their small shelter. Priscilla found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them, his arm around her shoulders, their sides pressed together, the subtle scent of leather and wood smoke that seemed uniquely his. "Xavier," she said finally, using his full name for the first time. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for everything you've done." He turned to look at her, their faces suddenly very close in the firelight. "There's nothing to repay. I told you before I helped because it was right, not because I expected anything in return." "Still," Priscilla persisted, meeting his gaze, "you've given up so much, your home, your safety." "And gained things too," Xavier said quietly. "Sometimes the unexpected path leads to better destinations than the one you planned." The implication in his words hung between them, charged with possibility. Priscilla felt herself drawn toward him, the intensity in his blue eyes pulling her in like gravity. When his lips met hers, it was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Priscilla answered by leaning into the kiss, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken beneath her palm. Xavier pulled back first, searching her face. "I shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" Priscilla asked, breathless. "You're vulnerable. Running from one man, depending on another for safety. It's not right to take advantage." Priscilla's hand moved from his chest to his face, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. "Is that what you think you're doing, taking advantage?" Xavier closed his eyes briefly at her touch. "I don't want you to confuse gratitude with other feelings." "I'm not confused," she said firmly. "Frightened, yes. Uncertain of the future, absolutely, but I know the difference between gratitude and what I feel when I'm with you." He opened his eyes, and the naked emotion she saw there stole her breath. "And what is that? What do you feel?" "Safe," she whispered. "Seen. Like perhaps I was meant to find your barn that night, as if all the fear and running led me exactly where I needed to be." Xavier's hand came up to cradle her face. "Priscilla." This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, only a hunger that had been building since that first night. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and she melted against him. All thoughts of pursuit and danger temporarily forgotten in the storm-swept wilderness of the Nebraska plains. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "We should rest," he said, though his arms didn't loosen their hold. "Long ride tomorrow." Priscilla nodded but made no move to return to her side of the fire. Instead, she settled against him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder as if it had always belonged there. As she drifted toward sleep, cocooned in the safety of his embrace while the storm raged beyond their shelter, Priscilla realized that for the first time since fleeing Omaha, she was no longer running from something, but perhaps toward something instead. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world glittering with raindrops in the morning sun. Priscilla woke to find herself still nestled against Xavier's chest, his arm protectively around her, even in sleep. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply absorb the peaceful feeling of safety and connection. Their relationship had shifted irrevocably with that kiss, and yet nothing felt rushed or unnatural about it. In the harsh world of the frontier, perhaps connections formed more quickly, more honestly, without the pretense and social maneuvering of city life. Xavier stirred, his eyes opening to find her watching him. Instead of awkwardness, a slow smile spread across his face. "Good morning." "Good morning," she replied, returning his smile. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, the simple gesture intimate in the quiet dawn. "Sleep well. Better than I should have on hard ground," Priscilla admitted. "You make a surprisingly comfortable pillow, Mr. Ryder." His laugh was warm and genuine. "Glad to be of service, Miss Forester." They set out after a quick breakfast, both aware of a new ease between them. As they rode side by side across the rain-dampened prairie, their conversation flowed more freely than before, punctuated by shared smiles and occasional touches when they stopped to rest the horses. By midday, they reached a small trading post situated at a river crossing little more than a general store, a smithy, and a few rough cabins clustered around a central well. Xavier deemed it safe enough to stop for supplies and information. "Stay close," he murmured as they dismounted in front of the general store. "These places see all types passing through, but they also carry news and gossip. Keep your hat low." Inside the store, a grizzled old man with a magnificent white beard greeted them from behind a counter cluttered with goods. "Help you folks looking to restock," Xavier said easily. "Coffee, flour, jerky if you've got it, and any news from the East." While Xavier engaged the shopkeeper in conversation, Priscilla browsed the store's eclectic offerings, everything from calico fabric to hunting knives, arranged with little apparent organization. She was examining a shelf of canned goods when the door opened, admitting two trail, dusty men. "Told you this was the last outpost before Fort Laramie," one was saying as they entered. "Been riding for 2 days straight. Wouldn't have to if that damn stagecoach hadn't been a waste of time," the second man grumbled. "Blackwell's gonna have our hides for losing her trail." Priscilla froze, her back to the door, heart suddenly pounding. From across the store she felt Xavier tense, though he gave no outward sign of alarm as he continued his transaction. "You gentlemen look like you could use some refreshment," the shopkeeper called to the newcomers. "Got fresh coffee brewing in the back." "Coffee and whatever passes for whiskey out here," the first man replied. "Been a long ride." As the shopkeeper moved to serve the new customers, Xavier casually made his way to Priscilla's side. "Don't turn around," he whispered, pretending to show her a tin of peaches. "When I pay, we'll walk out normally. Horses are ready." Priscilla nodded imperceptibly, keeping her face averted. She could hear Blackwell's men talking with the shopkeeper, describing a woman matching her description and asking if anyone fitting that description had passed through. "Ain't seen no lady like that," the shopkeeper replied. "Just the usual traffic freight wagons, a couple of homesteaders last week and these two." He gestured toward Xavier and Priscilla. "Husband and wife heading to visit family in Cheyenne, ain't that right, mister?" Xavier played along seamlessly. "That's right. My wife's brother has a place outside Cheyenne, expecting our first visit since the wedding." Priscilla kept her head down, letting the wide brim of her hat shield her face as she turned slightly to take Xavier's arm. "We should be going, dear. I'd like to make a few more miles before sunset." Her voice was pitched higher than normal, her accent deliberately altered to sound more Western than her natural Eastern cadence. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw one of Blackwell's men glance at her, then dismiss her without recognition. "Of course, sweetheart," Xavier replied, paying for their purchases. "Gentleman, shopkeeper." He nodded to the others as they moved toward the door. They were almost outside when one of Blackwell's men spoke again. "Hold on a minute." Priscilla's blood ran cold, but Xavier's steady pressure on her arm kept her moving forward. "Something else?" he asked, half turning but keeping Priscilla partially shielded by his body. The man was studying them with narrowed eyes. "You folks come through Ogallala recently?" "Can't say we did," Xavier replied easily. "Came up from the southeast along the Republican River." The man continued to stare, but his companion interrupted. "Leave 'em be, Decker. They ain't who we're looking for." Woman we want was traveling alone, and she'd be coming from the east on the main stage routes, not up from the south with a husband. Decker finally nodded. Right. Sorry to trouble you, mister. No trouble, Xavier said with a casual tip of his hat. Good luck finding whoever you're looking for. Outside, they mounted their horses with deliberate calm, though Priscilla's hands were shaking so badly she could barely grasp the reins. They rode out at an unhurried pace, as though they had all the time in the world and nothing to fear. Only when the trading post was well behind them did Xavier lead them off the trail, pushing the horses to a gallop across the open prairie. They're following the stage routes west, he called over the pounding hoofbeats. That's good for us, means our plan worked, at least partially. But we need to be more careful. No more stops at populated places if we can avoid it. Priscilla nodded, the fear that had gripped her in the store slowly giving way to grim determination. They rode hard for several hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Blackwell's men, before making camp in a well-concealed ravine as darkness fell. That night, as they huddled close by their small fire, Priscilla voiced the question that had been troubling her since their narrow escape. What happens when we reach your friend's ranch? Do we just wait for Blackwell to give up? He's not a man who forgets a slight, Xavier. He could search for years. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, absently running his fingers through her hair as she leaned against him. We have options, he finally said. Jackson's ranch is remote, well defended. You could stay there safely while we consider next steps. Next steps such as? You could go further west California, perhaps, or up to Oregon or Washington territory. Blackwell's reach has limits, even with his money and connections. Priscilla sat up, turning to face him. And what about you? Would you? Come with me. The firelight caught the conflict in Xavier's eyes. I have a ranch, a life I built. Of course, she said quickly, looking away. I shouldn't have presumed. No, Xavier interrupted, taking her hands in his. That's not what I meant, I just... He sighed. I'm trying to be honorable here, Priscilla. You're running for your life. It's happening in extraordinary circumstances. I don't want you making decisions about your future based on feelings that might be temporary, born of danger and proximity. Priscilla's chin lifted. You think my feelings for you are just a reaction to being rescued? That I'm some damsel attaching myself to the first man who showed me kindness? That's not, because if that's what you think, she continued, fire in her eyes now, then you don't know me at all, Xavier Ryder. I was prepared to leave Omaha alone, to make my way west without anyone's help, rather than marry a man I didn't love. I'm not looking for a replacement protector. Xavier's expression softened. I know that. It's one of the things I admire most about you, your courage, your determination. Then don't question my feelings, Priscilla said firmly. They're mine to give, freely and with full awareness of what I'm doing. He reached out to cup her face in his hands. I'm not questioning your feelings. I'm trying to make sure I don't take advantage of this situation. You have choices, Priscilla. Real choices about your future. I don't want to be the reason you limit those choices. Priscilla covered his hands with her own. And if my choice is you, if when we reach Wyoming and I'm safe, I still want to be with you. The vulnerability in her question hung between them, and for a moment, Xavier looked as though he was fighting an internal battle. Finally, he leaned forward to press his forehead against hers. Then I would be the luckiest man in the Western Territories, he said softly. Because God help me, Priscilla, I'm falling in love with you. Have been since I found you in my barn. The confession, spoken in the wilderness under a canopy of stars, stripped away the last of Priscilla's reservations. She closed the small distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that conveyed everything words could not: her fear, her hope, her growing love for this complicated, honorable man who had risked everything to help her. When they finally separated, breathless, Xavier held her close. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "Together, whatever comes next." For the first time since fleeing Omaha, Priscilla truly believed in the possibility of a future beyond running and fear, a future that, against all odds and expectations, now included Xavier Ryder. The journey to Wyoming Territory continued with increased caution after their near encounter with Blackwell's men. They traveled by day through the most isolated routes Xavier could find, avoiding settlements and keeping to natural cover whenever possible. At night, they made cold camps when they couldn't risk a fire, huddling together for warmth under shared blankets. Despite the danger that still shadowed them, Priscilla found herself experiencing a strange kind of happiness. There was a simplicity to their days, the rhythm of travel, the beauty of the changing landscape, the growing intimacy between them. Each night, as they talked by firelight or beneath the stars, she learned more about Xavier, his childhood in Virginia, his experiences during the war, his dreams for his Nebraska ranch. In turn, she shared her own stories, her education that had been unusually thorough for a woman, thanks to her progressive father, her love of literature and music, her grief when her mother died and later her father, the gradual way Theodore Blackwell had insinuated himself into her life during her most vulnerable time. "He was charming at first," she explained one evening as they camped within sight of the Laramie Mountains, their destination finally drawing near. "Attentive, respectful of my grief. He spoke of my father with such admiration, claimed they'd been friends through business dealings." Xavier listened quietly, his arm around her shoulders as they sat side by side against a fallen log. "It wasn't until after our engagement was announced that things changed," Priscilla continued. "He began dictating who I could see, questioning my every movement. When I overheard him discussing a business deal, something involving bringing young women from the East under false pretenses of legitimate work, I confronted him." Her voice tightened at the memory. "He laughed at first, told me I was being naive about how the world worked. When I threatened to break our engagement, to tell people what I'd heard, that's when he showed his true nature." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "The bruises I saw when we met," Priscilla nodded. "He made it very clear what would happen if I tried to leave him. Said no one would believe me over him, that he owned half the city officials in Omaha. He was right when I tried to seek help discreetly. Every door closed in my face. Except the kitchen maid. Martha, you called her." "Yes, her sister had been one of the girls lured west by Blackwell's operation. She disappeared after refusing a customer at one of his establishments." Priscilla's voice caught. "Martha risked everything to help me escape during that dinner party. I pray she wasn't discovered." Xavier was silent for a long moment. "Men like Blackwell don't stop, they don't change. They just find new victims." "I know," Priscilla said softly. "That's why I couldn't marry him, no matter the consequences. I couldn't bear to give him that kind of power over me, to be complicit in what he does." "You're the bravest woman I've ever known," Xavier said, turning to look at her directly. "Most people would have given in, taken the easier path." Priscilla shook her head. "Not brave, just unable to live with myself if I had." Xavier leaned in to kiss her gently. "That's exactly what bravery is." The next day brought them within sight of Laramie, the town visible as a smudge on the horizon by mid-afternoon. Xavier led them around it, keeping to the foothills as they approached Jackson McCall's ranch from the northeast. "We'll reach the ranch boundary by evening," he explained as they paused to rest the horses. "Best to approach after dark, just in case Blackwell's men have thought to check with ranchers in the area." Priscilla nodded, surveying the rugged landscape. "It's beautiful here." Different from Nebraska, Xavier agreed. Harsher in some ways, but there's a majesty to it. They rode on as the sun began its descent, the mountains to their west painted in shades of gold and crimson. As darkness fell, Xavier grew more alert, scanning the terrain carefully. "There," he finally said, pointing to distant lights twinkling in the valley below. "McCall Ranch." They approached cautiously, Xavier leading them through a stand of pine trees that provided cover almost to the edge of the ranch's cleared land. As they neared the property, he gave a distinctive whistle, 3 notes, a pause, then 2 more. Within minutes, a lantern appeared in the darkness, carried by a tall figure approaching on horseback. Xavier tensed, hand moving to his revolver until the figure whistled back the same pattern. "Jackson," Xavier said, relaxing and urging his horse forward to meet the other rider. The man who emerged from the shadows was as tall as Xavier but leaner, with sandy hair and a weathered face that broke into a wide grin. "Ex-Ryder, you old devil. Been too long." The men clasped hands firmly, genuine affection evident in the gesture. Jackson's gaze shifted to Priscilla. "And who might this be?" "Priscilla Forester," Xavier introduced her. "She's with me." Something in his tone conveyed more than the simple words, and Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well, Miss Forester, any friend of X's is welcome at McCall Ranch. Let's get you folks inside. You look like you've had a long journey." He led them toward the main house, a substantial 2-story structure built of logs and stone. As they approached, the door opened to reveal a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, a shotgun held casually in her hands. "It's all right, Sarah," Jackson called. "It's X with a friend." The woman, Sarah McCall, lowered the shotgun and smiled warmly. "Xavier Ryder. About time you paid us a visit." Her keen eyes took in Priscilla's disheveled appearance and the tension in both riders. "Trouble following you, possibly," Xavier admitted as they dismounted. "It's a long story." "Those are the best kind," Sarah replied, stepping back to usher them inside. "Especially when told over hot food and coffee." The interior of the McCall home was surprisingly refined for a frontier ranch house. Well-crafted furniture, colorful woven rugs, and bookshelves filled with volumes suggested both comfort and culture. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, casting welcome warmth. After they had washed away the trail dust and eaten a hearty meal prepared by Sarah, Xavier explained their situation: Priscilla's flight from Blackwell, their meeting, the pursuit, and their journey to Wyoming. He omitted certain personal details, but something in the way he occasionally glanced at Priscilla must have communicated the nature of their developing relationship. Jackson listened gravely, occasionally exchanging looks with his wife. When Xavier finished, he leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "This Blackwell sounds like bad business," he said. "But you were right to come here. Ranch is remote, well defended, and I've got good men working for me who know how to keep their mouths shut." "We don't want to bring trouble to your door," Priscilla said, speaking up for the first time since they'd arrived. Sarah reached across the table to pat her hand. "Trouble has a way of finding good people, Miss Forester. The important thing is facing it together." "X saved my life once," Jackson added. "Least I can do is offer safe harbor when he needs it." He glanced between Xavier and Priscilla, a knowing look in his eyes. "Though I suspect there's more to this story than just providing protection to a lady in distress." Xavier met his friend's gaze steadily. "There is." Jackson nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Well then, you're both welcome to stay as long as needed. We've got a guest cabin that should suit you fine, private but close enough if there's trouble." "I can help around the ranch while we're here," Xavier offered. "Earn our keep." "And I'm quite capable with household tasks," Priscilla added. "I'd be happy to assist with whatever needs doing." Sarah smiled approvingly. "A woman who doesn't mind work. I like her already, X." Later that night, after Jackson showed them to the guest cabin, a snug one-room structure with a stone fireplace, a bed and simple furnishings, Priscilla stood by the window, looking out at the starlit Wyoming landscape. "They're good people," she said softly. "You're fortunate in your friends." Xavier moved to stand behind her, hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "I know. Jackson and Sarah built something special here, not just a ranch, but a true home." Priscilla leaned back against him. "Is that what you want? For your place in Nebraska?" "It was," he replied, his voice thoughtful. "Now I'm not so sure what I want anymore. Or rather, I know what I want, but it's changed." She turned to face him. "What do you want, Xavier?" In the low light of the cabin, his eyes were serious, searching hers. "I want a life with meaning, work I can be proud of. A home that's more than just four walls and a roof." He touched her face gently. "And I want you beside me, if that's what you want too." Priscilla's heart thundered in her chest. "Even though we've known each other such a short time." "Time doesn't seem to matter much when you know something's right," Xavier replied. "Out here, people don't have the luxury of lengthy courtships and society's approval. Life is shorter, harder, more precious. You make decisions based on what's in your heart and hope you're brave enough to see them through." "And what does your heart tell you?" Priscilla whispered. Xavier's answer was to draw her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that conveyed everything he felt: desire, tenderness, and a commitment that transcended the brief span of their acquaintance. When they separated, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. "My heart tells me I love you, Priscilla Forester. Against all logic and timing, I love you." Tears welled in Priscilla's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first night when you found me in your hayloft and promised no one would search for me on your land." Xavier brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe. We'll build a life somewhere Blackwell can't touch us." "Together," Priscilla agreed, the word a promise and a prayer. That night, in the shelter of the small cabin on McCall Ranch, they came together as lovers for the first time, tender, unhurried, discovering each other with reverent hands and whispered endearments. As Priscilla fell asleep in Xavier's arms afterward, she felt a sense of peace she had thought lost forever when she fled Omaha. For the moment, at least, they were safe. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days at McCall Ranch settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Xavier worked alongside Jackson and his ranch hands, his experience with cattle proving valuable during the spring calving season. Priscilla found her place helping Sarah with household management, and joining her in teaching the children of the ranch workers 3 afternoons a week in the small schoolhouse Jackson had built. In the evenings, they gathered in the main house or at their cabin, sharing meals, stories, and occasionally music when Sarah played the piano Jackson had painstakingly transported from St. Louis as a wedding gift. Despite the shadow of Blackwell's pursuit that still lingered, these were days filled with purpose and growing happiness. 3 weeks after their arrival, as Priscilla was hanging laundry behind the main house, she noticed a rider approaching from the direction of Laramie. Her heart immediately quickened with fear, but she forced herself to remain calm, continuing her task while alerting Sarah, who was working nearby. "Rider coming," she said quietly. Sarah glanced up, her expression sharpening as she assessed the distant figure. "Looks like Tom Riley works at the general store in town. Regular delivery day isn't until Friday." She moved casually to where her shotgun rested against the porch, calling out to one of the ranch hands to fetch Jackson and Xavier from the north pasture. By the time the rider reached the house, both men had returned, with Xavier positioning himself protectively near Priscilla as Jackson stepped forward to greet their visitor. "Tom," Jackson called. "Wasn't expecting a delivery today." The man, middle-aged with a drooping mustache, dismounted stiffly. "No delivery, Jackson. Message." He glanced curiously at Xavier and Priscilla before continuing. "Strangers in town asking about a woman matching the lady's description there. Offering money for information. Sheriff Wallace thought you should know, given you've had visitors recently." Jackson's expression remained neutral, but Priscilla felt Xavier tense beside her. "Sheriff mention who these strangers were?" Jackson asked. "3 men, city types, one with a scarred face. Said they represented a businessman from Omaha looking for his runaway fiancé." Tom shrugged. Sheriff didn't like the look of them, especially when they started offering money around the saloon for information. "Appreciate the warning, Tom," Jackson said, reaching into his pocket to press a coin into the man's hand. "Sheriff Wallace is a good man. Tell him I'm obliged." After Tom departed, Jackson turned to Xavier and Priscilla, his expression grim. "They're getting closer." "We should leave," Priscilla said immediately. "We've brought enough risk to your family." "Nonsense," Sarah interjected firmly. "This is exactly why you're here, because we can help. Laramie's still 20 miles away, and Tom didn't say they knew you were here, only that they're asking questions." Xavier looked troubled. "They're persistent, I'll give them that. Means Blackwell wants you back badly. Or wants to ensure I can't testify against him," Priscilla added quietly. Jackson and Sarah exchanged a look. "You didn't mention testimony before," Jackson said. Xavier glanced at Priscilla, who nodded slightly. Priscilla overheard details about Blackwell's operation trafficking young women, among other things. If she were to take that information to federal authorities, he'd face serious charges, Jackson finished. "That explains the manhunt." "It also changes the calculation," Sarah added thoughtfully. "This isn't just about a jilted fiancé anymore. It's about putting away someone who's hurting a lot of people." Priscilla looked between them. "What are you suggesting?" "That perhaps running isn't the only option," Sarah said. "Perhaps it's time to fight back." That evening, they gathered in the main house after the children were asleep, speaking in low voices around the kitchen table. Jackson had sent one of his most trusted hands to Laramie to gather more information about Blackwell's men discreetly. "If Priscilla were to testify," Xavier said, continuing their earlier discussion, "she'd need federal protection. Blackwell has too much local influence in Nebraska." "The territorial marshal in Cheyenne is a straight arrow," Jackson replied. "If we could get Priscilla to him with enough evidence to warrant opening an investigation." "Evidence is the problem," Priscilla interjected. "I overheard conversations, saw some documents, but nothing concrete enough for legal proceedings." Sarah, who had been quiet for some time, suddenly straightened. "What about the kitchen maid who helped you? Martha, if she's still in Omaha and willing to testify about her sister?" "That would be 2 witnesses," Xavier said, understanding dawning. "And if there are other girls who have escaped Blackwell's operation?" "A pattern," Jackson nodded. "Enough for the marshal to investigate." Priscilla looked troubled. "I couldn't ask Martha to put herself at risk. She already risked everything to help me escape." "We wouldn't have to," Xavier said slowly, an idea forming. "If we could get word to her that you're safe and planning to testify, give her the option to join you." "How?" Priscilla asked. "We can't exactly send a telegram to Blackwell's house asking for Martha." "No, but I know someone who could get a message to her," Xavier replied. "Sheriff Daniels in Red Cloud. He has connections across Nebraska, lawmen who share information. If I could get word to him." The conversation continued late into the night. plans forming and being discarded as they weighed risks and possibilities. By morning, they had settled on a course of action. Xavier would travel to Cheyenne to speak with the territorial marshal, while Priscilla remained safely hidden at the ranch. If the marshal was receptive, Xavier would then send a coded telegram to Sheriff Daniels in Red Cloud, setting in motion attempts to contact Martha and gather additional witnesses. "I don't like being separated," Priscilla said privately to Xavier as they prepared for his departure the next day. "If Blackwell's men are nearby, Jackson and his men will keep you safe," Xavier assured her, though concern lined his face as well. "And this way, if I'm followed or questioned, you're not immediately at risk." She knew he was right, but fear still clutched at her heart. "How long will you be gone?" 3 days to Cheyenne, maybe 2 there depending on the marshal's response, 3 back. Xavier pulled her into his arms. "A week, no more. Then we'll know if this plan has any chance of succeeding." Priscilla leaned against him, memorizing the solid feel of him, the steady beat of his heart. "Be careful," she whispered. "I can't lose you now." "You won't," he promised, tilting her face up to kiss her. "I'll come back to you, Priscilla, always." Xavier departed before dawn, taking a roundabout route to Cheyenne to avoid potential watchers in Laramie. The days of his absence stretched interminably for Priscilla, filled with anxiety that she tried to mask by throwing herself into work around the ranch. Sarah, perceptive as always, kept her busy with tasks that required concentration, and in the evenings included her in family activities with the children. On the 4th day after Xavier's departure, Jackson's man returned from Laramie with troubling news. Blackwell's men had expanded their search, showing Priscilla's photograph in surrounding ranches and settlements. They had offered a substantial reward for information leading to her location. $500, Jackson repeated grimly. "That's enough to tempt a lot of folks in these parts. Should we move her?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. Jackson considered this. "Not yet. Moving presents its own risks. But we'll increase patrols around the property perimeter, and Priscilla should stay close to the main house." That night, unable to sleep with worry about Xavier and the closing net around her, Priscilla sat by the window of the guest cabin, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the spring chill. The sound of approaching footsteps made her reach quickly for the revolver Xavier had insisted she keep nearby. "It's just me," Sarah's voice called softly before she appeared at the door. "Saw your light still burning." Priscilla relaxed, setting aside the weapon. "I couldn't sleep." Sarah entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might like some tea. My mother always said it soothes troubled hearts." "Thank you." Priscilla accepted the offering gratefully, gesturing for Sarah to join her by the small table. They sipped in companionable silence for a moment before Sarah spoke again. "You're worried about him." It wasn't a question, but Priscilla nodded anyway. "He's risking so much. For me." "That's love," Sarah replied simply. "Jackson crossed half a continent to find me when I was in danger." Didn't even hesitate. Priscilla looked up, surprised. "I didn't know that." Sarah smiled faintly. "Not many do. It's not a story we share widely." She set down her mug. "Before I came west, I was engaged to a man in Boston. Wealthy family, socially prominent. When I broke the engagement to accept a teaching position in Missouri, he didn't take it well. He followed you and made my life a nightmare. Threatened me, ruined my reputation with lies, eventually attacked me." Sarah's expression hardened at the memory. "I fled further west, ended up here in Wyoming, thought I was safe. Then one day he appeared in Laramie." Priscilla leaned forward, caught up in the story. "What happened?" "Jackson happened," Sarah said, her smile returning. "We'd met just weeks earlier when I came to the ranch to teach the children. He knew something was wrong the moment my former fiancé arrived in town. got the truth out of me, and then—" She paused. "Let's just say he ensured the man understood that his attentions were unwelcome, permanently." "Did he?" Priscilla left the question unfinished. Sarah shook her head. "No, though not for lack of consideration. Jackson believes in justice, not murder, but he made it very clear what would happen if the man ever came near me again. He left Wyoming territory the next day and never returned." She reached across to take Priscilla's hand. "My point is, X loves you. I see it in the way he looks at you, the way he's willing to risk everything to keep you safe. And from what I've observed, you love him just as fiercely." "I do," Priscilla whispered. "So much that it frightens me sometimes." "I've never felt this way before." "That's how it should be," Sarah assured her. "Real love, the kind that lasts, isn't comfortable or safe. It's overwhelming. It changes you." She squeezed Priscilla's hand before releasing it. "X will come back to you, and together you'll find a way through this." After Sarah left, Priscilla found herself able to sleep at last, comforted by the older woman's confidence and the knowledge that she wasn't alone in facing a dangerous past. The next day brought unexpected news, a telegram from Cheyenne delivered by a ranch hand who had gone to town for supplies. It was addressed to Jackson but clearly meant for Priscilla as well. "Business promising. Partner interested. Returning with additional investor. Expect arrival by Friday. Regards." Jackson read it aloud, then looked up with satisfaction. "The marshal is receptive. X is bringing him here." "Here?" Priscilla's eyes widened. "Is that safe?" "Safer than you traveling to Cheyenne with Blackwell's men watching the roads," Jackson replied. "And it means the marshal takes your information seriously enough to come in person." Hope, cautious but real, blossomed in Priscilla's chest. Perhaps there was a way out of this nightmare after all, one that didn't involve running for the rest of her life. Friday arrived with clear skies and a tension that hung over the ranch like a coming storm. Jackson positioned men strategically around the property, alert for any approach that didn't match Xavier's expected route. Priscilla remained indoors with Sarah, alternating between anxious pacing and forced concentration on mending. It was late afternoon when they heard the signal, Xavier's distinctive whistle pattern, coming from the southern approach. Jackson verified through his spyglass before giving the all-clear. 3 riders approaching, Xavier in the lead. Priscilla rushed onto the porch, propriety forgotten as she strained to see him. When Xavier finally rode into the yard, accompanied by 2 men in official-looking attire, she couldn't contain herself any longer. She flew down the steps as he dismounted, throwing herself into his arms with a cry of relief. Xavier caught her, holding her tightly against him. "I told you I'd come back," he murmured into her hair. "I know," she whispered. "I just needed to see you, to touch you." Someone cleared their throat nearby, and Priscilla remembered their audience. Blushing, she stepped back, though Xavier kept a steadying hand at the small of her back. "Priscilla, this is Marshal James Cooper." Xavier introduced the older of the 2 men, who tipped his hat respectfully. "And his deputy, Thomas Grant. Gentlemen, Miss Priscilla Forester." Marshal Cooper was a solid man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily deceived. "Miss Forester," he greeted her. "I understand you have information regarding Theodore Blackwell's operations that might interest the federal government." "I do, Marshal," Priscilla confirmed, "though I fear it may not be enough on its own." "Let's discuss it inside," Jackson suggested, stepping forward to shake hands with the newcomers. "After such a long ride, I'm sure you could use refreshment." Inside the main house, around the large dining table, Priscilla recounted everything she knew about Blackwell's activities, the conversations she had overheard, the documents she had glimpsed, the patterns of behavior she had observed. As she spoke, Deputy Grant took careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When she finished, Marshal Cooper sat back, his expression thoughtful. "You're right that it's not enough for an indictment on its own, but it's a strong starting point, especially with the names you've provided." "There's more," Xavier said, exchanging a glance with Priscilla before continuing. "We've made contact with the kitchen maid who helped Priscilla escape, Martha Jenkins. She's willing to testify about her sister's disappearance after working at one of Blackwell's establishments." Priscilla's head snapped up. "Martha, she's safe," Xavier nodded. "Sheriff Daniels located her. She left Omaha the day after you did, fearing reprisal. She's been staying with relatives in Lincoln." "And she's willing to testify?" Marshal Cooper asked. "She is. And she knows of at least 3 other girls with similar stories who might come forward with protection." Xavier leaned forward. "It's enough for an investigation at minimum." Marshal Cooper considered this. "Blackwell is well connected. This won't be easy." "Few worthwhile things are," Xavier replied. "But if you can build a case, get federal charges filed." "His local influence won't matter as much," the marshal finished. "Yes, I'm familiar with how these operations work." He turned to Priscilla. "You understand what you're committing to, Miss Forester. Testifying means facing Blackwell in court, potentially enduring attempts to discredit you." Priscilla straightened her shoulders. "I understand, Marshal. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to see justice done." "And she won't be alone," Xavier added, his voice firm. Marshal Cooper studied them both for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "Very well. Here's what happens next. Deputy Grant will take your formal statement tonight. Tomorrow, we begin arrangements to move you safely to Cheyenne, where you'll be under federal protection while we locate and interview the other witnesses." "How long will all this take?" Sarah asked, speaking up from where she had been listening quietly. "Building the case." "Weeks, possibly months," the marshal admitted. "These investigations are thorough, precisely because men like Blackwell have resources to fight back. But once charges are filed," he smiled grimly, "things tend to move more quickly." That night, after giving her statement to Deputy Grant, a process that took several hours as he meticulously recorded every detail, Priscilla found herself alone with Xavier for the first time since his return. In the privacy of their cabin, she finally allowed herself to release the tension she had been holding since his departure. "I was so afraid," she admitted as they lay together on the narrow bed, her head on his chest. "Every day you were gone, I imagined the worst." Xavier's fingers traced soothing patterns along her spine. "I'm sorry. I hated leaving you, but it was necessary, and it worked. The marshal is taking this seriously." Priscilla propped herself up on an elbow to look at him. "Do you really think this could work? That Blackwell could actually face justice?" "I do," Xavier replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It won't be quick or easy, but with multiple witnesses, federal involvement. Yes, I think he could finally face consequences for what he's done." Hope and fear warred within her. "And if it doesn't work? If he uses his influence to escape justice?" Xavier's expression hardened. "Then we have other options. But let's give the law a chance first." She nodded, settling back against him. "And us? What happens to us when this is over?" His arms tightened around her. "Whatever you want, Priscilla. We could go back to Nebraska, to my ranch, or start fresh somewhere else entirely, California, Oregon, wherever you'd feel safest and happiest. As long as we're together," she whispered. "I don't care where we go." Xavier tilted her face up to his. "I love you," he said simply. "Through all of this, that's the one thing I'm absolutely certain of." "I love you too," Priscilla replied, the words feeling like a vow. As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Priscilla allowed herself to truly imagine a future beyond fear, and running a future with Xavier, perhaps children someday, a home filled with love and safety. For the first time, that future felt not just possible but within reach. The journey to Cheyenne the next day was undertaken with military precision. Marshal Cooper arranged for a decoy group to leave the ranch openly, heading east, while Priscilla, Xavier, and Deputy Grant departed quietly before dawn, traveling west through little-used mountain trails. Jackson sent 2 of his most trusted men as additional escorts, their knowledge of the local terrain proving invaluable. They avoided Laramie entirely, circling around to approach Cheyenne from the west, a longer route, but one less likely to be watched by Blackwell's agents. By nightfall, they had reached a small federal outpost where fresh horses awaited them. After a brief rest, they continued through the night, reaching Cheyenne as dawn broke. The federal building where Priscilla would be housed was unassuming from the outside, a brick structure that served multiple governmental functions. Inside, however, security was evident in the armed men positioned at key points and the careful checking of identification before they were allowed to proceed to the upper floors. "These will be your quarters," Deputy Grant explained, showing Priscilla and Xavier to a suite of rooms at the rear of the building. "Not luxurious, but secure. Meals will be brought up, and there's a small courtyard where you can get fresh air that's not visible from the street." Priscilla surveyed the space: a sitting room, a bedroom, and a small bathing chamber, simple but clean, with windows that overlooked the enclosed courtyard. "It's fine," she assured him. "Much better than I expected." "Marshal Cooper will be by later today to discuss next steps," Grant continued. "In the meantime, try to rest. The coming weeks will be demanding." After he left, Xavier tested the door locks and checked the window fastenings before finally allowing himself to relax slightly. "It's secure enough," he conceded, "and they have men watching the building." Priscilla moved to stand beside him at the window, looking out at the courtyard below. "I never imagined my life would come to this, hidden away in protective custody, preparing to testify against one of Omaha's most prominent citizens." Xavier slipped an arm around her waist. "Regrets?" "Not one," she said firmly, leaning into him. "Except perhaps that I didn't see Blackwell's true nature sooner, before others were hurt." "You can't blame yourself for his actions," Xavier reminded her. "All you can do now is help stop him from hurting anyone else." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Martha Jenkins arrived in Cheyenne, accompanied by Sheriff Daniels, who had personally escorted her from Nebraska. The reunion between Priscilla and the young woman who had risked everything to help her escape was emotional. "I knew you'd find a way," Martha said, holding Priscilla's hands tightly. "When Sheriff Daniels told me you were safe and planning to testify, I couldn't get here fast enough." "You're so brave," Priscilla told her. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you did that night." Martha shook her head. "It's me who should be thanking you. After Eliza disappeared, I thought no one would ever hold Mr. Blackwell accountable. Now maybe she'll get justice, even if it's too late to save her." Through Martha's connections, the marshal's office located 3 other women who had escaped Blackwell's network. Each with stories similar to Eliza's, lured west with promises of respectable work, only to find themselves trapped in brothels controlled by Blackwell's associates. 2 agreed to testify. The third was too frightened, but provided a written statement detailing her experiences. With each new testimony, the case against Blackwell grew stronger. Marshal Cooper worked methodically, building a comprehensive investigation that connected Blackwell to a trafficking operation spanning multiple territories. He sent agents to Omaha to gather financial records, interview reluctant witnesses, and trace the money trail that linked legitimate businesses to illicit operations. Throughout this process, Xavier remained constantly at Priscilla's side, declining offers of separate accommodations and making it clear that where she went, he went. His protective presence was a comfort during the grueling days of interviews and statement revisions, his quiet strength a bulwark against the fear that still occasionally gripped her when she thought of facing Blackwell in court. 6 weeks after their arrival in Cheyenne, Marshal Cooper called them to his office, his typically stoic expression giving way to satisfaction. "It's done," he announced without preamble. "Federal charges have been filed against Theodore Blackwell and 6 of his associates. Agents are serving the warrants in Omaha today." Priscilla sank into a chair, momentarily overwhelmed by the news. "He'll actually be arrested. He's being taken into federal custody as we speak," the marshal confirmed. The evidence was too substantial to ignore, even with his connections. Judge Wilson signed the warrants personally after reviewing the testimonies. Xavier's hand found Priscilla's shoulder, a steadying presence. "What happens next?" "He'll be transported to Cheyenne for arraignment, then held for trial. Given the nature of the charges and his resources, bail is unlikely." Marshal Cooper leaned forward. "But I won't sugarcoat this, the trial will be difficult. Blackwell has already retained high-priced lawyers from Denver. They'll attack the credibility of every witness, especially you, Miss Forester, as his former fiancé." Priscilla straightened, resolve hardening her expression. "Let them try. I know the truth and so do the others. We're ready to face whatever comes." The marshal nodded, approval evident in his gaze. "That's the spirit we need. In the meantime, you'll both remain under protection. Blackwell may be in custody, but his organization is extensive. We can't rule out attempts to influence the proceedings." As they left the marshal's office, the reality of what lay ahead settled over Priscilla. They had crossed a threshold there was no going back now. Blackwell would know exactly who had brought him down, and even from a cell, he was a dangerous enemy. Having second thoughts, Xavier asked quietly as they walked back to their quarters. Priscilla shook her head. "No, just realizing that this isn't over yet. It won't be over until he's convicted and sentenced." "One step at a time," Xavier advised. "Today he's in custody. That's a victory worth celebrating." That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their room, Priscilla voiced the question that had been growing in her mind. What happens after the trial, assuming he's convicted? Xavier propped himself up on one elbow. "What do you want to happen?" She considered the question seriously. "I want peace, a life without looking over my shoulder, a home." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "With you. Then that's what we'll have," he promised. "Nebraska, Wyoming, California, wherever you feel safest." "Your ranch," Priscilla decided. "It's where we began. It seems right that it should be where we build our future." Xavier's smile was visible even in the dim light. "My thoughts exactly." Theodore Blackwell arrived in Cheyenne 2 days later, transported under heavy guard. Priscilla deliberately stayed away from the federal building that day, unable to face seeing him again so soon. The newspapers carried the story prominently: a prominent Omaha businessman charged with trafficking, extortion, and a host of other federal crimes. The articles carefully avoided naming the witnesses, but speculation ran rampant. The trial was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks, unusually quick, Marshal Cooper explained, due to the seriousness of the charges and the judge's determination to proceed while the witnesses were secured and available. Those weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Priscilla met repeatedly with the federal prosecutor, a sharp-minded woman named Rebecca Townsend, who had been specially assigned to the case. Miss Townsend was meticulous, helping Priscilla anticipate the defense's strategies and strengthen her testimony against attempts to discredit her. They'll try to paint you as a jilted woman seeking revenge, Miss Townsend warned during one session. Or suggest that you misunderstood what you heard, that you're confused about legitimate business discussions. I know what I heard, Priscilla insisted. And with Martha's testimony and the others. Yes, the corroborating witnesses strengthen our case immensely, the prosecutor agreed. Still, be prepared for personal attacks. They'll bring up anything they can to question your character or motives. Xavier, who had been silently observing the preparation session, spoke up. They'll use our relationship against her, won't they? Suggest she ran to me, that we conspired together. Miss Townsend nodded grimly. Almost certainly, which is why we need to address it directly in your testimony, Miss Forester. No surprises, no details for them to discover dramatically. I understand, Priscilla said, though the thought of having her feelings for Xavier scrutinized and potentially denigrated in open court was painful. I'll be honest about everything. The day the trial began dawned clear and cold, with a brisk wind sweeping down from the mountains. The courthouse was already crowded when Priscilla arrived, escorted by Xavier and 2 deputy marshals. They were taken through a side entrance to avoid the throng of curious onlookers and newspaper reporters gathered at the main steps. In a small anteroom, Priscilla waited with the other witnesses, Martha, pale but determined, and the 2 women who had escaped Blackwell's network, both visibly nervous but resolute. They would testify after Priscilla, who as the primary witness would set the foundation for the prosecution's case. Xavier couldn't stay with her. He would be called as a witness himself, describing how he found Priscilla and the condition she was in when she fled Blackwell. Before he left to take his seat in the courtroom, he squeezed her hands tightly. "You can do this," he told her, conviction in his voice. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." Priscilla nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. "I will." When she was finally called to the witness stand, Priscilla walked into the courtroom with her head high, refusing to be intimidated by the packed gallery or the battery of defense lawyers seated beside Theodore Blackwell. She couldn't avoid looking at him as she took the oath, the first time she had seen him since her escape from Omaha. Blackwell looked impeccably groomed despite his weeks in custody. His expensive suit and confident posture designed to project the image of a respectable businessman wrongfully accused. When their eyes met, his expression shifted momentarily, a flash of cold rage quickly masked by a bland smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Townsend guided Priscilla through her testimony methodically, allowing her to tell her story from the beginning, her introduction to Blackwell after her father's death, their courtship, the gradual revealing of his true character, and finally, the conversations she had overheard that exposed his trafficking operation. "And you are certain, Miss Forester, that the defendant was discussing the transportation of young women for immoral purposes?" Miss Townsend asked. "Yes," Priscilla replied firmly. "He specifically mentioned fresh merchandise from Boston that would satisfy the special requests from the Nebraska City establishment. When his associate expressed concern about the girls being difficult, Mr. Blackwell said they wouldn't be a problem once they understood they had no options." Her testimony continued for hours, with Miss Townsend drawing out every detail Priscilla could recall about Blackwell's operations, his associates, and the businesses that served as fronts for his illicit activities. Throughout, Priscilla maintained her composure, even when recounting the physical abuse she had suffered when she confronted Blackwell with what she knew. When the defense's cross-examination began, Blackwell's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Harrington with a deceptively genial manner, approached the witness stand with calculated casualness. "Miss Forester, "You've presented quite a tale to this court," he began. "A respected businessman secretly running a criminal enterprise, abusing his fiancée, threatening her life. It's dramatic, certainly. But I have to wonder, is it true, or merely the invention of a woman scorned?" "Objection," Miss Townsend called. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Wilson ruled. "Counselor, ask proper questions." Harrington adjusted smoothly. "Miss Forester, isn't it true that you became engaged to Mr. Blackwell primarily for financial security after your father's death left you in reduced circumstances?" Priscilla kept her voice steady. "No. I had sufficient inheritance from my father to live comfortably. I became engaged to Mr. Blackwell because I believed him to be a good man. And yet, when you supposedly discovered his true nature, rather than going to the authorities in Omaha, you fled in the middle of the night like a thief. Why was that?" "I attempted to seek help locally," Priscilla explained. "I approached Judge Hollister, who had been my father's colleague, and Sheriff Bennett. Both made it clear that they would not act against Mr. Blackwell, and Judge Hollister warned me that making accusations would only result in my own reputation being destroyed." "So you claim," Harrington countered. "And instead you ran away, eventually finding yourself in the company of one Xavier Ryder with whom you have now established a romantic relationship. Convenient, wouldn't you say?" Priscilla's chin lifted. "There was nothing convenient about fleeing for my life, Mr. Harrington. I didn't know Mr. Ryder before seeking shelter on his property. Our relationship developed later, after he had protected me from Mr. Blackwell's men, who were actively searching for me with the intent to bring me back by force." The questioning continued in this vein, with Harrington attempting to undermine her credibility by suggesting various motives for her testimony: revenge, financial gain, protection from prosecution for breaking her engagement. Through it all, Priscilla remained steady, answering truthfully and refusing to be provoked into emotional outbursts that might damage her credibility. When she was finally allowed to step down, exhausted after nearly 5 hours on the stand, she felt drained yet oddly triumphant. She had faced Blackwell and his intimidating legal team, and she had not wavered. Xavier testified next, corroborating Priscilla's account of her arrival at his ranch and the subsequent pursuit by Blackwell's men. His straightforward manner and military background lent weight to his testimony, particularly when he described the confrontation in Red Cloud with Mercer and his companions. "And you had no prior relationship with Miss Forester before she appeared on your property?" the prosecutor asked. "None whatsoever," Xavier confirmed. "I had never met her or even heard her name before that night. Yet you chose to help her, at considerable risk to yourself. Why?" Xavier's gaze briefly found Priscilla in the gallery before returning to Miss Townsend. "Because she was clearly terrified, injured, and telling the truth about being pursued. I couldn't in good conscience turn away someone in that situation." When Harrington cross-examined Xavier, he focused heavily on their developing relationship, insinuating that Xavier had taken advantage of Priscilla's vulnerable state, or that they had conspired together for financial gain. "And what exactly do you stand to gain from Miss Forester's testimony against Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Ryder?" Harrington asked. Xavier's expression remained impassive. "Nothing, sir. I left a prosperous ranch and risked my life to help her reach safety and justice. I've gained nothing material from this situation. Nothing except the affections of a wealthy young woman," Harrington suggested with a smirk. Xavier's eyes hardened. "Miss Forester's affection isn't a prize to be won or a commodity to be gained, Mr. Harrington. It's a privilege I neither expected nor sought, but one I value above any material consideration." The response silenced Harrington momentarily, and several jurors nodded approvingly at Xavier's dignified answer. The trial continued for 2 weeks, with testimony from Martha, the other victims, financial experts who had traced Blackwell's money through various front businesses, and even a former associate who had turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. Throughout, Blackwell maintained his pose of injured innocence, occasionally leaning to whisper to his attorneys or shaking his head in apparent disbelief at the testimony against him. Finally, after 3 days of jury deliberation, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts. Judge Wilson sentenced Blackwell to 20 years in federal prison, with his assets seized to provide restitution to his victims. As Blackwell was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his composed facade finally cracked. He turned toward Priscilla, his face contorted with hatred. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll never be safe." "Never." The outburst earned him a sharp rebuke from the judge and hasty removal by the guards, but his words hung in the air, a final threat that cast a shadow over what should have been a moment of pure victory. Outside the courthouse, away from the press and onlookers, Priscilla trembled in Xavier's arms. "He meant it," she whispered. "Even from prison he has connections, people who would do his bidding." "He's finished," Xavier assured her, though his own expression was grave. "His money, his power, it's all gone, and he'll be in a federal penitentiary far from here." Marshal Cooper, joining them in the private room where the witnesses had gathered, offered additional reassurance. "Blackwell will be transferred to a prison in the East, far from his base of operations. His network is being dismantled as we speak, and the new territorial governor has ordered an investigation into the Omaha officials who protected him." It was Martha who spoke the truth they all felt. "But we'll always look over our shoulders now, won't we? Always wonder if someone loyal to him might seek revenge." The marshal didn't dismiss the concern. "It's a risk," he acknowledged, "but one that diminishes with time and distance. The best thing you can all do now is build new lives, far from the shadows of the past." That evening, alone in their quarters, Xavier held Priscilla close as she finally released the tension of the trial in quiet tears. "It's really over," she said, half questioning, half stating. "The trial is," Xavier confirmed, stroking her hair. "Now we can begin thinking about the future." "Our future?" Priscilla looked up at him, eyes still damp but with hope dawning in their amber depths. "Together." Xavier nodded, then surprised her by moving away briefly to retrieve something from his coat pocket. When he returned to her side, he knelt before her, holding a simple gold ring with a small diamond that caught the lamplight. "I've been carrying this since we left Jackson's ranch," he admitted. "Waiting for the right moment when the shadows had passed and I could offer you not just love, but a future free from fear." He took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "Priscilla Forester, will you marry me? Build a life with me, wherever that life leads us." Tears spilled anew down Priscilla's cheeks, but these were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Xavier Ryder, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, then stood to gather her in his arms, sealing their promise with a kiss that spoke of all they had endured and all that awaited them. 1 month later, on a perfect spring morning, Priscilla Forester became Priscilla Ryder in a small ceremony at Jackson McCall's ranch. Sarah had helped prepare the garden for the occasion, filling it with wildflowers and ribbons, while Jackson had arranged for a circuit judge who owed him a favor to perform the ceremony. The guest list was small but meaningful. Martha Jenkins, who had decided to remain in Wyoming and had found work as a housekeeper for a kind family in Laramie. Sheriff Daniels, who had traveled from Red Cloud for the occasion. Marshal Cooper and Miss Townsend, representing the justice they had fought for, and a few trusted hands from both ranches who had helped protect them during their ordeal. Priscilla wore a gown of ivory silk that Sarah had helped her find in Cheyenne, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Xavier, handsome in a new suit, watched her approach with wonder in his eyes, as though he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Dearly beloved," the judge began, his voice carrying across the sun-dappled garden, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, proof that even in our darkest moments, love can find a way." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with vows they had written themselves that acknowledged the unusual path that had brought them together. "I found you hiding in my hayloft," Xavier said, holding Priscilla's hands in his. "A stranger seeking shelter from a storm, both literal and figurative. I promised then that no one would search for you on my land, never imagining that in protecting you, I would find the greatest treasure of my life. I vow to continue that protection, not because you need it, but because loving you, supporting you, standing beside you through whatever comes is the greatest privilege I could ever know." Priscilla's voice was steady as she responded, "I came to you running from danger, seeking only momentary safety. What I found instead was a man of honor and courage who showed me what true partnership means. You never saw me as something to be possessed or controlled, but as someone to be respected and cherished. I vow to love you with the same openness and honesty you have shown me, to build with you a home filled with trust and joy, and to face whatever challenges come our way with the strength we have found together." When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was simple, but joyous, a feast prepared by Sarah and the ranch women, music provided by a fiddler from town, and dancing that continued well into the evening under lanterns strung from the trees. As night fell, Xavier led Priscilla away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the valley, the lights of the ranch house twinkling below them like earthbound stars. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Beyond words," she replied, leaning into him. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this life, this happiness. It still feels almost like a dream." Xavier turned her to face him, the moonlight silvering his features. "Not a dream, a new beginning." He kissed her gently. "Our beginning." The following day, they bid farewell to their friends and set out for Nebraska, where Xavier's ranch awaited them. The journey was leisurely, unmarked by the fear and urgency of their previous travels together. They stopped in small towns along the way, Priscilla now proudly introducing herself as Mrs. Ryder, the simple gold band on her finger catching the sunlight. When they finally crested the rise overlooking Xavier's ranch, their ranch now, Priscilla felt a surge of emotion. The modest house, the well-maintained barn where she had first sought refuge, the rolling pastures dotted with cattle, it was home in a way no place had been since her father's death. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder," Xavier said softly, reaching across to take her hand. "Home," Priscilla repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, that's exactly what it is." As they rode down toward the house, the foreman Xavier had left in charge emerged from the barn, waving in greeting. Life on the ranch quickly resumed its rhythm, but now with Priscilla at its heart. She brought new energy to the household, establishing a garden, reorganizing the interior for greater comfort, and even beginning to teach the children of neighboring ranchers 3 days a week in a small schoolroom Xavier built for the purpose. Xavier, for his part, seemed to work with renewed purpose, expanding the ranch's operations and implementing innovations he had observed during their time in Wyoming. Together, they created not just a successful ranch but a true home, a place of warmth, laughter, and love. 6 months after their return to Nebraska, on a crisp autumn evening, Priscilla shared news that brought tears of joy to Xavier's eyes. They were expecting a child. "A family," he whispered, gathering her close. "Our family." As spring returned to the Nebraska plains, bringing with it new calves, wildflowers, and the first anniversary of their meeting, Priscilla's condition was evident beneath the loose dresses she now wore. They often reminisced about that stormy night when fate had led her to his barn, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You ever regret it?" Priscilla asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Getting involved in my troubles, risking everything." Xavier's hand found hers, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "Not for a single moment," he replied without hesitation. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Every risk was worth it." In late summer, Priscilla gave birth to a son strong, healthy, and with his father's blue eyes. They named him James Daniel Ryder, honoring both the marshal who had helped bring Blackwell to justice and Sheriff Daniels, who had protected them in Red Cloud. As Priscilla cradled their newborn son, Xavier sat beside them on the bed, overwhelmed by the depth of his love for this small family that had come into his life so unexpectedly. "Thank you," he said softly, pressing a kiss to Priscilla's temple. "For what?" she asked, smiling tiredly up at him. "For hiding in my hayloft," Xavier replied simply. "For trusting me, for giving me more than I ever dreamed possible." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. The ranch prospered, eventually becoming one of the most successful in the county. 2 years after James's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, named for the 2 women who had helped them on their journey, Sarah McCall and Xavier's sister Elizabeth. Blackwell's threat never fully materialized his imprisonment in a distant federal penitentiary, and the dismantling of his network ensured that his reach could no longer extend to harm them. Occasionally, news would reach them of former associates being arrested or businesses connected to his operations being shut down, each report further confirmation that the danger had passed. Martha Jenkins remained in Wyoming, eventually marrying a kind shopkeeper in Laramie and starting a family of her own. She and Priscilla maintained a regular correspondence, their shared experience having forged a bond that transcended distance. Jackson and Sarah McCall visited occasionally, delighting in the growth of their namesake children and bringing news from Wyoming territory. These visits were always occasions for celebration, with stories shared long into the night about their adventures together. 10 years after that fateful night in the barn, as Priscilla and Xavier sat on their expanded porch watching their children play in the summer twilight, a letter arrived bearing official government seals. It contained notification that Theodore Blackwell had died in prison, bringing final closure to a chapter of their lives they had long since moved beyond. "Does it change anything?" Xavier asked as Priscilla set the letter aside. She shook her head, watching James teaching his little sister how to lasso a fence post. "No, we stopped living in his shadow long ago." She leaned against Xavier's shoulder. "Our life has never been about him. It's been about what we built together after I found safety in your hayloft." Xavier's arm encircled her shoulders, drawing her closer. "That night, when I found muddy footprints leading into my barn, I had no idea I was tracking down my future." Priscilla smiled up at him, the years having only deepened her love for this man who had risked everything to protect her. "And I had no idea that in running from danger, I was actually running toward the greatest happiness I would ever know." As dusk settled over the Nebraska plains, transforming the landscape into a canvas of purples and deep blues, The Ryder family gathered together on the porch of the home they had built, not just the physical structure, but the bonds of love, trust, and shared experience that had grown from that first desperate meeting in a storm-swept barn, when a cowboy found a woman hiding in his hayloft and promised that no one would search for her on his land. A promise that had led, against all odds, to a love story neither of them could have imagined, one that would continue to unfold across the seasons and years of their lives together, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other not just safety, but true belonging.